Chapter 4. If a man's affairs are to prosper. Weeks passed before young Fu felt a sense of security on the streets. At dawn, he walked with his mother as far as the bristle shop, and though he was only too glad for the comfort of a companion, he would have bitten his tongue before admitting to Fu Baba either his fear or his dependence on her. At dusk, he mingled as inconspicuously as possible in the milling throngs of the Chungking streets. Curiosity, which prior to his experience with the soldiers had controlled most of his actions, was now severely tempered by the determination to avoid dangers like that in the future. The sights of a single soldier sitting in a tea house was sufficient to quicken his normal pace into a run. Small Lee, on one of their ceaseless errands, noticed his friend's aversion to a gray uniform and questioned him. "Why are you so afraid of the military? I myself do not get in their way, but you avoid them as you would an evil spirit." Young Fu evaded the reply. So vivid was his memory of the horror that he could not bring himself to relate to it again. A day after it had occurred, he told Wang Scholar, who had listened in silence, save for sympathetic clicks of the tongue and one comment at the close. "Good iron is not wasted in making nails, nor good men in making soldiers." At Tang's, the workmen, discussing political conditions as usual over the midday rice, said that these troops were behaving better than most. At least general looting was not taking place, and so far a very moderate tax had been levied. "The fewer words about such things, the better," remarked Tang. "It has been my experience that two Khans are all alike on their greed for their money and power. Sometimes their methods differ. If this one seems to be dealing gently with us now, then there is a greater reason to expect rougher handling in the future." The warning served to change the apprentice's skin to goose flesh. But as the weeks lengthened into months and the city relaxed and continued quiet, his heart grew braver and he began to run about with his old freedom. There was little he did not know by the time of Chungking's lanes and byways. By this time of the lanes and byways. Tang's errands sent him in every direction, from one city gate to another. He knew at what hour a storyteller would be likely to stand at a certain angle of wall and thrill his audience with tales from history. He could tell where one might expect to find, each 10th day of the moon, a peep show station, one with puppets of remarkable gifts. His nose scented funeral and wedding processions, and whenever possible he directed his errands according to these various attractions. Each forenoon, a public letter writer sat before one of the foreign temples, which was a French cathedral, and almost daily young Fu made it his business to halt for a moment that he might watch the other draw the strokes of characters. Already he had memorized some of the simpler ones. Given time, he would learn more. Small Lee, who had now become his close friend, did not share his comrade's enthusiasm for stolen knowledge. "I, too, wish to learn," he said, "but not with the loud swinging from my shoulders. Moreover, while I do not, not with this load swinging from my shoulders. Moreover, while I do not fear the master's sharp tongue too greatly, it is wise not to provoke him by constant tardiness." Young Fu waved an open palm in inquiry. "How, then, is one ever to learn? And you yourself told me not to be afraid of the coppersmith's scoldings." Small Lee said nothing further. Several hours later, Wang Scholar reopened this conversation. He came upon young Fu as the boy, forefinger extended, penciled shadowy lines on the darkness of Chairmaker's Way. The teacher looked on with interest. "Who taught you to write the word for door with 7 strokes?" "I watched the letter writer before the foreign temple. That and other words have I learned," the student boasted with pride. "Then learn something more. There is no merit worthy of boasting, and thine of this newly acquired knowledge less than most, for the strokes were wrong." Young Fu was crestfallen. "My heart is hot with shame, honorable one, but I thought by studying this letter writer I might discover how to read and write." "It is better to remain ignorant than to know what is incorrect. Come with me," he commanded, and the youth followed him up the ladder to the 2nd floor. He had not gone there before, though he had wished to do so many times. Fu Baba had cautioned him about intruding on the thinker's privacy. The furnishings of the room were of the simplest kind, poorer even than his mother's, but books were in profusion. He gazed at them reverently. "Sir, you are very rich." Wang Scholar smiled and nodded his head. "Poor and unworthy am I," he agreed, "but here is the wealth of the ages." He motioned for the boy to sit at the table, and joining him, took up the brush pen. This he moistened, rolled the hairs into a fine point on the slab of ink, and pulling a thin yellow sheet of paper toward him, began to write. "Learn, as should any good student, the first sentence from the Sanzin-Ching. At birth, men are by nature good of heart." Fascinated, his pupil watched. With flushed cheeks, he received the brush from the teacher and copied the characters as best he could. Wang Scholar mingled words of encouragement and chiding. When he decided that the boy had done enough for one night, he drew the writing materials toward him. "In time, thou wilt learn to form the strokes with ease. Patience and industry are all that is required of the student." He studied young Fu's expression. "Why dost thou wish to do books?" The other hesitated for a moment. I do not know, he replied. Since the day I first became apprentice to Tang, I have wanted to recognize characters and write them. In this city, it is necessary to have learning in order to win fortune. He who can read and write is not so easily cheated of his rights. He looked up to find the old gentleman's face stern with disapproval. And is there no other reason? Wang's scholar demanded. Shall I teach the ancient wisdom to one who wishes to use it only for the earning of money? Knowest thou not that the treasure of knowledge is to be revered for itself alone? It has been given that men might learn how to live, not to win fortune. What is fortune without wisdom? His voice slowly resumed its even tone. Thou art young, and I who am old forget the dreams of youth. Go now and return to me tomorrow night. Together we shall study what the sages have taught. Young Fu crept slowly down the stairs. In the doorway he looked on the sleeping street. Wisdom had been given that men might learn how to live. This was a new doctrine indeed, and certain it was that Chungking City, as he saw it from the daylight to dark, needed little but the importance of earning money. Was this why scholars seemed different from other people? Puzzled, he entered the house. Where have you been so late? His mother wished to know. In Wang's scholar's room. Tonight he taught me my first lessons, and I go to him again tomorrow at this hour. Fu Ba blinked her tired eyelids. Ay, she exclaimed, this is great business. Where will you find money to pay a teacher? Her son dismissed the matter with a wave of his hand. None is needed. Tonight Wang's scholar told me that money was of small importance. Fu Ba opened her eyes more widely to stare at him, and then closed them and yawned. Hurry, she ordered, or we shall be rising before we have slept. In the days following, young Fu made no effort to pass the letter writer's stand. Once Small Li questioned him about his loss of interest. It was on the tip of his companion's tongue to speak of his good fortune in having a real teacher, but he did not. As yet, he knew very little. Each evening, Wang's scholar made him sense more clearly the boundless reaches of learning, and it would be wise to have a foundation before his associates at Tang's put his scholarship to the test, as he knew only too well what they were capable of doing. Few of them could name more than a handful of characters, some not at all. Tang and the clerk had the widest information out of books. And as for the latter, young Fu had his doubts about how far his attainments extended. There was not one among the older employees he liked so little as he did this man. Just why he could not say. In some inexplicable way, the accountant was connected with his feelings against Small Den. Perhaps because the older man wore constantly the supercilious air that Den strove so hard to copy. But most clerks were like that. Reckoning accounts on the abacus and writing the results in books made them feel vastly superior to the journeymen and apprentices with whom they associated. Also, they were accustomed to having others do all the unpleasant tasks for them. He, who had accompanied this one on the errands to wealthy homes, knew that only too well. And he would not give the fellow the pleasure of laughing over the idea of an apprentice-turned-student. He wished, though, that he might tell Li they were friends, but if he did, the whole shop would know it by midday. Li was not very successful about hiding things in his brain. One afternoon, Tang called him. He held a letter. Take this, he said, to Be Carpenter, who lives midway on the road. Let me see if the word Be is in the back there to see what Be is. I think that might be like sir or something. Nope, it's not in there. So maybe it's just the name. Okay, the captain on a foreign gunboat wishes a small table of teakwood with a brass tray fitted on the top. He must have it within 2 days before he sails down the great river. If Beck Carpenter cannot complete the table in this time, I wish to know at once. Young Fu turned his steps toward the land gate. In a clearing before a sugar manufacturer's place, he halted to watch an ox turn a treadmill. Steadily, the patient beast plodded the circle, moving the great flat stone that crushed the sweetened juice from cane stalks. Round it went in endless revolutions. The boy wondered how the animal could continue hour after hour. His own head felt dizzy from watching. Passing through the city gate, his pace quickened down the Denzgi Nai road. Beggars were as thick as flies. Every conceivable disease and deformity of body had its victim here. Many, for the sake of his business, bore self-inflicted wounds. Others had been crippled for that purpose in early youth by parents in the same profession. One could not remain in the Beggars' Guild and present a normal body to the world. And since it was much simpler to earn a livelihood by asking alms than by laboring like a coolie, many chose that way and wore without question its disfiguring symbols. So they hurt themselves, or their parents hurt them, so they would get money as beggars. In the city, beggars whining about a shop could ruin a merchant's trade, and in order to relieve themselves of this nuisance, most shopkeepers paid a regular tax to be exempt from their annoyance. Others there were, of course, sad outcasts of illness and poverty, who had been forced into this life of wretchedness. Traffic at this hour of the day was heavy, and they paid little attention to a boy whose discolored garments and stained hands marked him as an apprentice. Sedan chairs and more prosperous-looking travelers were their natural prey, and each in turn was forced to run the awful gauntlet of their demands for charity. Pity me, you have food, clothing, and a home. I starve in rags. This stone is my bed. Of your wealth, give me a copper. Only a copper. Only a copper. Young Fu soon left them behind. He began to take delight in the scene about him. The country road was rough and winding, but on either side lay richly fertile fields. His thoughts winged back to the little farm near Tutu, I don't know, and the days spent with his father as they cultivated the crops. Within him was a strange feeling of discomfort and emptiness. Almost a year had passed since his father's death, but the realization of his loss came to him at this moment with greater force than ever before. Certainly, he told himself, he was growing older, that he could lift heavier weights, he knew, and that his blue cotton clothes never seemed long enough to reach his wrists and ankles was true also. Pity for that man who had worked so hard and reaped so little swept over him. His father had been good. His shoulders straightened at the memory. He himself was the only son of his house. He would see to it that his ancestors had no cause to be ashamed of his actions. Beck Carpenter's shop was sheltered by windows that rose above a pool. The afternoon sun filtered through the leaves and spattered lacy patterns on the earthen floor of the workroom. Men sawed at a great log, and the sweet odor of green wood filled his nostrils. On the floor, 3 children played with sawdust and shavings. While the proprietor read Tang's note, young Fu picked up a curl and tickled the bare shoulders of the small boy. The youngster darted out of his reach and continued his play. There was an air of peace. And here's a picture here of all the beggars. There was an air of peace about this workshop, very different from the clamor and smoke of the coppersmith's place. Beck Carpenter hesitated over the reply. 2 days means holding back other orders, but I suppose it might be arranged. He wrote a few characters and gave the paper to the youth. Sunset was mellowing all that it touched when the land gate came into view. From either direction, people hurried through this entrance to the city. At dark, the great doors would be barred, permitting no one to go in and out until dawn lightened the eastern sky. A handsome sedan chair, I don't know if it's sedan or sedan, demanded the right of way, and young Fu stepped aside. The beggars swarmed about it, blocking the path of its bearers as they whined their pleas for pity. That the occupant had no time to waste was plain. Without warning, a wire strung with 50 cash. A wire strung with 50 cash hurtled through the air, struck one of the beggars clinging to the chair poles, and landed in the withered arms of a leper close to young Fu's feet. The wretched horde, startled by the unexpectedness of the gift, turned from the chair as its bearers moved solidly on and sniffed like dogs who have lost a trail. In another moment, they had swooped in a mass on the unhappy recipient of the treasure. I'm trying to understand what that was. So there was a leper and money. I don't know there. Young Fu watched in disgust. The leper drew his wasted limbs together and huddled protectingly over his sudden stroke of good fortune. So some money just landed upon him as his hideous companions, flapping bundles of filth and tatters, screamed imprecations. I haven't ever used that word before, imprecations, on his head, and turned their crutches into weapons with which to pry him loose from the coins. Aroused by the unusual tumult, a soldier ran down from the gate and, prodding indiscriminately with his rifle, succeeded in separating the mob. The leper was still alive, but he no longer held anything of value. Near him, a man who wore a thin knife blade through the fleshy part of his wrist from which drops of blood oozed slowly, a never-failing method of gaining pity, made a suspicious movement. Instantly, the beggar's attention centered on him. "Curse him, he has it. He would steal what belongs to all. Divide, divide," they yelled, "or we will take the matter to the king, the head of the king, who is the head of the Beggars' Guild." The soldier demanded the booty. "Who caught this when it fell?" I, screeched one after another. From the panting bundle on the ground, a faint moan issued. Sorry about that. The soldier looked about. His glance discovered young Fu. "Did you see?" he asked. The apprentice found it difficult to speak. Fear of questioning by soldiers was still fresh in his mind. He motioned with his chin to the leper, and as soon as the other's gaze left him, he made for the gate. Over his shoulder, he was aware that the rightful owner again held the cash. How long they would remain in his possession now that night was approaching was another problem. The soldier was attempting to quiet the thwarted group. Some had already resumed business. As he climbed the slope of the city, Stumbling steps sounded behind him. He looked back. The man with the knife in his wrist hissed at him. If you had not told, the money would have been ours to share. When you come this way again, we will remember. With a shrug, Young Fu passed into the city. A beggar's threat meant little. Pleading and cursing were the limits of their language. He had felt much greater fear when the soldier first turned to him. And for having loitered so long, he now had Tang's annoyance to face. He began to run. 3 moons went by before the youth had cause to remember the beggar's warning. 3 months of a growing friendship for Small Lee and increasing antipathy for Den, means he didn't like Den.